The four co-founders of Gather, which I'm sure actually that you guys have all heard of and probably used. Do you have a way that you usually introduce yourself these days?
I guess I can give it a try.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, really excited to be here, guys. Thanks to Hack. You guys, such an awesome thing you guys have going on. I love Hack. Super happy to be here and answer your questions. Something that's pretty casual, so feel free to pop in anytime. So, as Robert just mentioned, my name is Alex. I'm one of the co-founders of Gather. We're a startup that was founded last year, 2020, in like May. So we've been around for like a little over a year now. Time truly flies. I was an MIT student as well. I graduated with an MN in 2020, so pretty recently. And nowadays I live in Chicago, so if you guys want to visit, let me know. At Gather right now, I work as the VP of product, which means I take care of the product, design, growth, and map arts teams. And I also work pretty closely with an engineering team called the remote work team. So we're working on, mostly solving the problem of figuring out how to use Gather best for remote work.
Cool. So one of the things I feel most curious about is like the early days of Gather. I imagine many of us know you as like apparently like a world-class TA, like a very good TA. And then, but I'm sure one day you're sort of teaching classes, and then it seems like the next day you're just like really pushing at Gather. I'm curious how that transition was.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, huge thanks for the TA comment. I mean, I'm super honored. I think being a TA at MIT was just like one of the greatest privileges that I had to teach people. It was amazing. In terms of the transition from going from a TA to being a co-founder, I feel like there are a lot of at the time when you're a student, right? You all are very familiar with this. You have classes, you have projects, right? You work on P-sets. In the early days of a startup, it feels very similar, right? The only difference is now this project is your full-time job, and you spend a long time on it throughout your week, right? But the vibe is very similar. It's a group of very enthusiastic people coming together to build something together. And I think in that regard, MIT prepared me really well. I feel like our classes here really kind of reflected what it'd be like to start your own venture out in the real world. So the transition was pretty smooth, I'd say. Nowadays, as the company is scaling up, we're thinking more about people organization, how to build a company correctly. And that in itself is a different challenge. But I think in the early days, it really did feel like a very natural move.
One of my last questions about the early days, I guess, because I don't want to spend too much time on it. But I imagine you sort of graduate and all your friends like go off and do stuff that is not a startup, right? They work for like very respectable companies and like do things that their parents are like really happy with. I'm curious, like, was this like a big decision for you? Was it natural to do Gather? Like, how did that go?
Yeah, Robert, I think that's a really good question. I wish I had a really awesome answer, like super glorious. I took the leap. But honestly, last year, pandemic, right? I got my diploma, and I just had some time to kill this summer, right? and as often a lot of projects start, I had some friends. They were working on this. We decided we're going to work on this interesting project of having these little characters. And they walk around, and when you get close to someone, you see their video. It's like, whoa, right?
Online time.
Yeah, right. And I was like, yeah, I'm down to work on this for a little bit, and a little bit turned into now. So, at the time, it didn't really feel like it was going to be anything huge or anything like that. I took it very ad hoc. I took it more as like a opportunity to learn, opportunity to build something cool with friends. And when you have an opportunity like that, you just take it. So that's all I ended up doing.
Just another question along those lines is like, how do you go from having something that's like a cool project you've been working on to turning it into a full company?
That's also a really good question. I think the difference between a project and a product, right, is that products are built for very strong reasons. Right? And there's strong purpose behind them, and users behind them. Right? That's not to say that projects don't evolve in products. They obviously do. Right? But, in the beginning, Gather, or at the time it was called Online Town, was definitely a project, right? You guys should go back and see those fonts. We had like serif fonts mixed with sans serif fonts, right? And the Gather itself was like a quarter of the screen. It was a little bit of a mess, right? But it wasn't necessarily built for users at the time. But the pandemic was the thing, right? And everything was shutting down, and people didn't, for lack of a better term, have a better option. Right? So they're like, we'll take a chance with this crazy UI. And at the time, we sold a conference. Still remember, they're called Sigma. This conference, and they were like, yeah, we want to use your platform to run our conference. And that's the moment when I think we turn from a project into a product, because now we're building for someone, right? Now we have people who are coming to us and they're saying, well, we need these features. Here's why I'm running our conference, and here's what I need. And when you have that purpose, then you can evolve your project into something that's actually backed by users and purpose, and it becomes a little more mature, I'd say. So I think that was the point where we kind of transferred to that kind of mindset.
You guys don't like silence. One thing I'm curious about, just as you mentioned, working on projects with some friends, when I think about startups that I know, Gather really stands out as being like particularly exceptionally mission aligned around the metaverse building sort of thing. I'm curious, did the four of you know each other already? Did you sort of coalesce around this thing? Did you convince each other? How did you end up with four people who were so aligned on this point?
Yeah. So it's actually an interesting story because the four Gather co-founders, I actually didn't meet two of my co-founders for a very long time, and they became my closest friends, right? Because when you're working on a startup, I'm sure you all have worked on projects where you're up at like 3 a.m., right? Does stuff to you, and you all know this, right? And I didn't get to meet them until much later. And to me, this was a very strong indicator that we were onto something. Because if you can make these amazing connections over Gather, right, then that sounds like a base on which you can build metaverse. Now when Gather started, companies weren't talking about the metaverse yet quite as often. I had never heard about the metaverse when we started Gather, right? And nowadays everybody's talking about it, which is interesting. And at the time, I think I wasn't, to be entirely frank, too tuned in on what the metaverse can be, right? I'm a very execution-focused person. I come from an engineering background, right? I majored in 6 here. I just like building and shipping things. And you all at Hack MIT know this, right? When you're just building a ship. And I love that feeling of taking an idea, and I would put it to first maybe Figma, and then bring it into code and actually ship it. And that's why I joined Gather in the first place. But the more time I spent with the company and the more I experienced this product, the more I realized there's something really strong here. And I think that's what makes a good vision, right? It's one that's inspiring, one that's really infectious, and it really draws you in. Because it's not enough to have 4 co-founders be aligned on the vision. You need to scale a company, right? You need all your employees to be really bought in on this vision. So I think that the reason why we're so aligned behind it is because it is a strong vision. What this metaverse can be and our ideas for what it could be, right, is inspiring. And I have personal experience kind of being drawn into that and really aligning behind it.
At Gather, do you use Gather?
Yes. Yes, we use Gather. In fact, our office is in Gather. We actually just did an office move.
Okay.
It's very interesting. No, because you outgrow your office. Our first office had 6 desks. We had 2 empty desks, right? one meeting room. I think we've made 3 office moves so far, each time from scaling our company. It's a lot easier than in real life. And when you run out of desks, you just build new ones, right? So it's actually a space constraint problem, not so much a desk constraint problem. So eventually you just need more meeting rooms and more space, and then you upscale your space.
There's 2 things that have my attention still from the last thread that I want to ask about. One is, I hear you saying you're like a very execution-focused guy, and I imagine that being VP of product stays like loosely in that sphere. But I'm curious how both like how your personal day-to-day has changed as Gather has scaled, and how do you feel about that sort of change?
Yeah, I think when you're early at a startup, the roles are very loosely defined. You know, you're kind of in the mud, right, with everything else, and you do whatever you need to do. So in the beginning, my role was very dynamic. Like, I spent most of my time doing software engineering, and the only reason I was called VP of product is because I did software engineering on the product side, right? And you know, to be entirely honest, I think I didn't really quite understand what VP of product actually was. You know, I was like, well, I work on the product. I'm the main person who works on product, so therefore I should be the VP of product. And, you know, but I didn't just do that. You know, I did recruiting for a real long time. You know, huge process of recruiting. Recruiting is very difficult. Right? Setting out offers, following candidates, things like that. I did support. I did sales. I did all these things. Right? And as the company scales, eventually you start to kind of specialize in certain ways. And for me, VP of product nowadays mostly just means that I make sure my teams are executing on the right high-level visions. It's like, where do we want to be in a few months? How are we going to get there? You know, and that is something that then I pass off to, you know, individual product managers, individual maps, art teams to then go and realize. On the other side of things, you know, I think we as a startup are still very dynamic. We want to try to keep that, speed, right, and that ability to really execute, even as we're scaling past, past 70 at this point. And so I try to still spend some of my time writing code, writing software, and I've been trying to do more of that recently. So I think at the end of the day, especially founders, do whatever is most impactful for the company, right? And for me, that means I spend part of my time doing management and vision stuff, and part of my time writing software. And if those needs change, then I will also change my job.
I imagine you're very practiced at writing software. I feel like even from talking with you, you're like very impressive at this. I'm not sure whether you would have come in being experienced at like management and vision stuff, or if you feel like you really just like learned it from scratch, or if something that you did before came in handy. Like, how is starting that going?
It's hard. No one ever really teaches you how to start a startup, right? This is not something you learn in school. And more than anything else, I don't think anybody actually really knows what they're doing when you're starting a startup. And the reason that is because you'll talk to your advisors, right? And they'll be like, yeah, here's the right way to build a product organization. And here's how product managers work. And then, you go back and you think about it, and you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When you talk to somebody else, and they tell you something entirely different, right? But this makes sense. Because the average number of startups that somebody has successfully founded is like 1, right? So everybody's experience is so different. And every team is so different. It's really hard to apply like a general hard and fast rule to anything when it comes to these things. So I think for me, a lot of it was learning on the fly, right? You listen to the company, you listen to what your team's needs are at the current moment, and then you go and try stuff. If it doesn't work, you try again, right? And when it comes to product, that has been my approach so far. Now, we're a growing company, right? So obviously we're going to need to hire a lot more experienced product leaders into the organization, and I'm very well aware of that. I think at the end of the day, my expertise still lies in engineering, like you said. Product management is an entirely new beast that I'm still learning a lot about every day. But for now, like I said earlier, we do whatever the company needs. So I try my best to keep the company on the same vision and move forward.
I don't want to monopolize here.
Yeah, it's all good. I guess, like people watching online might ask me, but people in this room are all at MIT. Is there anything you felt like specifically happened at MIT that really like helped you launch this company?
Well, MIT is a pretty crazy place, right? you're surrounded by a lot of people that are very passionate, I think. And this is true for all kinds of colleges across the universe, the United States and the world, not just MIT, right? Really any college. People are motivated, driven, they want to do things. And talking to these people, and being friends with them and bouncing ideas off of them is one of the most valuable things you can do while you're on campus. I've recruited all my friends. That's the long way of saying I've recruited all my friends, right? And it's been super, super valuable, right, to go do that. So that's, I guess, the first way that campus has really prepared me for this. MIT in particular, I think, has a bit of a culture of entrepreneurship. I took a few classes that I think were pretty helpful. I think one class I took, I don't think it's offered anymore, is called 6S187. It's basically this like introduction to entrepreneurship, and you like build your own product. So I built this company, you know, product called Bread Bowl, and the idea is you share meals, right? So you cook like 3 portions in BC, and then you can sell 2 of those portions to someone who lives in Massey, right? Because they don't want to eat dine. That was crazy, and people supported it. I had a class that supported it. I had a professor who was helping me learn how to like do all these things, set a business plan, all that. So the university I think really lends itself to giving these resources. I know there are all kinds of other resources here on campus, right? That you can use. There's Start Labs, right? There's the Martin Entrepreneurship Center, like all these places really can help you get the skills you need. But at the end of the day, I really do think it really revolves around meeting people, getting those connections, because that's the most valuable thing.
I'm curious, so it sounds like from your experience sort of figuring out how to like manage and vision, that there's sort of a lot of like, you go one way and like it sort of works or sort of doesn't, you sort of turn a little bit or sort of drive. I'm curious if there are any decisions that stand out as not like that. Any decisions that you look back and you think like, wow, like good thing we went way A instead of way B because that was just critical.
I think it's hard because you never know what would have happened if you had taken that other decision path, right? And this is something that you're going to learn. Like you're faced with so many decisions all the time when you're building a product, right? And I think it's impossible to tell how the other paths would have gone. One of the things that we did early is we focused on academic conferences as one of our big markets. Our first customer was a big academic conference, and we continued to do that. We ran like ICML and Europe, these like machine learning conferences, right? And that still continues to be a core part of our customer base today. I think it was actually a really good choice. And the reason why is because the founders understood academic conferences pretty well. Philip, our CEO, had done a lot of academic research, so he knew a lot of people. He had those connections, right? And it was a great starting ground for us to kind of like, take our product and actually make some money with it, right? And just like earlier, like I said, right, going for academic conferences gave us users, turned us from a project into a product because we were really trying to build for those users at that point. So I think that was one of the big things that we kind of started off on and really helped us achieve that kind of success. That's what I'm trying to answer. And I guess one more thing that I'll add in here is our decision to be more playful. So I don't know how many of you guys have used Gather, right? But it's kind of like Pokemon, right? People say like, oh, you're Pokemon X Zoom, right? That's like a classic people thing. Just I guess. But when we do that, and it's a very intentional decision to make it seem a little less intimidating when you first come on, right? Especially for a generation like ours that grew up with video games, that grew up with the idea of moving around in space, feels very conducive. And I feel like that was one of our key decisions, that we didn't pivot towards like talking heads, for instance, right? That made us the part of the PR today.
Along those lines of just like making decisions, it sounds like a lot of things have happened to work out, like luckily. Is there anything that's like stood out as something that you found hard about like starting up the company, or like ever a time when you like thought it might not work out?
Oh yeah, plenty. Right, I think you're never really sure it's going to work out, and this persists for a very, very long time, even now, right? Like it's startups are full of unsureness, I think some times where it's been difficult is like, I think we hit a point at our company where we just didn't have enough engineers, right? And I think I really felt this once, we were just getting so many support emails, right? And then people would be asking for all kinds of stuff, and then I would spend more time like reading through everything, like figuring everything out, more so than actually going to do those things. And I had to support those features after they go out, right? So that was very scary. And then our company made a decision to just hire a lot of engineers, and that was the move. And I think at the time we weren't really prepared for that kind of growth, right? A team that goes from 5 or 6 to like 20, like the vibe is very, very different, right? Like imagine working on a project team for like close to 0 or something like that, right? 3, 4 people, right? Now imagine a 20-person team. It's just so different. And I don't think we were necessarily prepared for that at the time. But obviously, with all startups, you kind of learn, right? You figure it out, and we were eventually able to scale to the point where we felt like we were more comfortable with the high number of people. So it's never easy. I don't know if it was the wrong decision to hire a lot of people. We obviously needed it, right? And we'll never know what would happen if we didn't. But I think that was one of the big moments of uncertainty. It's like, how are we going to handle all the scaling, all at once?
I do want to open it up to the floor here. I'm not exactly sure what the time is. It's 8:30. Okay, so I'm happy to
8:30.
up here. Yeah.
Can we start with an online question?
Oh, please.
So, Anonymous wants to know, does GatherTown hire remote student interns who are studying in Canada? At least also due to COVID.
Yes, great question. Here's the recruiting. I love it. Co-founders will be so pleased. Yes. We hire. Actually, one thing about Gather that's really cool is we hire everywhere. Come on, the entire point of our platform is that anyone can do anything from anywhere, right? You should be able to connect with your friends from anywhere. You should be able to work from anywhere. So Canada, 100%. Basically, we hire from all around the globe, and we do take exceptional student interns. So yes is the answer. Gather.com/jobs. Hit me up. Especially if it's in product. Hit me up. Yeah.
So you're talking about how you VP of product, you're talking about how software engineering background. I was wondering, do you also feel like the user experience?
How's that work? Think about the user experience as product? Yeah, I think it's hard. Coming from a software engineering background, you're very used to just executing, right? You have some kind of preset and you need to, pass your test cases, and you pass the test cases, right? Building for users is not like that at all, because you don't have test cases. You have no idea whether you succeeded or not, right? At the end of the day, I think product is difficult because there are often, it's not executing on the answer that's hard, it's finding the problems to solve. That's what product's all about. Is you go to your users and you talk to them and you try to figure out the problems. What really keeps you up at night about Gather, right? What can we do that will fix that for you? So for product, I feel like it's just really important. Just always talk to your users. Keep talking to them. Go into a lot of places where your product's being used and just watch people use it, right? And at some point you gain an intuition for what are people's needs? What are the kind of errors that they're making and how people can fix those? And then you go and you fix them. Obviously that's very broad, right? But it's hard to specify with something as kind of nebulous as product office.
Just raise my hand. Okay, as VP of product, what is your large scale vision for Gather in the future? Do you see it becoming expanding into things, or becoming an MMORPG or something like that?
I love this question. I actually get a lot of this question all the time when I'm interviewing product managers, right? Because they all care about the vision and what we're doing. Gather's vision is very grand, right? And I think that's what makes a good vision. Your vision has to be ambitious. It has to be wow, right? In order to drop something. I think Gather's future relies very heavily on customization. I want people to be able to do anything they want with Gather, right? I want them to be able to build whatever they want in Gather. Right now, we have already started this with, for instance, our map maker tool. You can, build whatever maps that you want. But I think Gather should go even beyond that. For instance, one thing that I think we should be able to enable is you will build like games with complex logic inside of Gather, right? For instance, you should be able to build Among Us in Gather, and it shouldn't be difficult, right? So once we've enabled a platform where people can do these things and have the power to, build whatever they want, you let the users take the product wherever you want it to go, right? And you just provide the platform on which they build it. And who knows where they'll go with it, right? But that's the exciting part, because once you enable it, someone's going to do something cool. And you can go and look at it and you're like, wow, I didn't even think about that, right? So it's not so much my vision. I think, my vision is one that enables other people to take their own visions into our platform. I don't know if you're calling it. Sorry, but TA habits,
I see.
Online question.
Yeah, we have a couple more online questions.
Would you like to go first?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, wait, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't hear. Wait, did someone else say?
JB.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was.
It's okay, she's just your director.
Oh, I know you completely right. Oh, God. Sorry, go.
Okay. So I imagine that customization takes quite a bit of time, right? And we here at Hack have experienced that too because we're using Gather for our own hackathon.
Sure.
What are you guys doing for maybe those clients who really just want to get something up fast, or they're just looking for some remote space to work? I know there's so much going on, and how do you kind of like abstract the bells and whistles away from them?
That's such a good question. I think we just went into the grand vision with that question, right?
Right.
But before you can build a grand vision, like something that I say to my reports all the time, is an empty metaverse is no metaverse at all, right? In order to build out this platform that people are gonna, innovate on and build all kinds of cool things on top of, you first need those people. You need those users, right? So you need to build these concrete use cases on top of the platform first. So one example is something like hackathons, right? We should be able to build a product on top of Gather that makes it really easy to set up your hackathon. And I think one of our teams at Gather right now, they're called the events team, is working just on this, right? They're working on making this flow super easy. So you come in, and then you can just set up your event, and everything will be much more smooth, right? I think this is really important, and something that a lot of people miss because they just want to get to the grand vision, but there are steps. And it's a really great point that you need to make it as easy as possible for your users to get onto the platform so that you'll get more evangelists to eventually do that building. So the concrete steps we're taking right now is we have dedicated teams at Gather that are working on concrete use cases, like events, like remote work, like social discovery. All these different use cases are currently being built. And these teams are all super new. We only started working on, in terms of these teams, in the past 1 or 2 months, right? So hopefully we'll see vast improvements on these product verticals and be able to get more users that way.
One of the things, just following up on this quickly, that I thought was really cool was I heard Philip speak 2 months ago, and he mentioned that people were building pretty successful businesses on top of Gather, doing stuff like, I want to say they were setting up tables or something, something that you would expect in the real world. Oh yeah, you hire someone to make a space look good, or I thought that was a really interesting way to handle this class of problem.
I think that is a great example of the infancy of what we're trying to do in our long-term vision, right? Rather than being the ones that are building the businesses on our platform, we let other people do the building, and we just make a platform powerful enough for them to do so. It's kind of like the internet. The internet itself is very simple. All it does is provide you a platform to connect with web pages, right? But then think about everything the internet has done for us, right? All the things that people have been able to build that technology. And Gather should be the same way. We already have companies, like you said, that are setting up conferences for people. You connect with a company called VirtualShare, and they will do everything for you. They'll set up your conference venue, they'll decorate it for you, they'll put all the objects in there, right? Why can't we have things like escape room companies, right? People should be able to run escape rooms on Gather super easily, right? Or, we should be able to provide venues for people to attend concerts, right? Or meet BTS. I don't know, all these different ideas, right? Well, why can't this happen on Gather? Because it should be able to happen on Gather if we eventually get to that final vision.
want to be sensitive to the unknown number of online questions.
So I guess we'll start asking questions from online. So Jackson asks, what space do you think Gather will occupy in the future, given that events are transitioning to being in person and people anticipate the end of the pandemic?
Yeah, well, fingers crossed for the pandemic ending as soon as possible, right, obviously. We all want to get back to the way things used to be. I don't think Gather is, or I don't want Gather's ultimate vision to be something that replaces real life. It should be something that augments real life, right? You should, for instance, one example of this is remote work is one of the biggest examples of this that I see. Like, one of the big reasons we go into office is like office collaboration, right? Sitting down at a desk and hearing people near you and saying good morning and all these interactions. But like, why shouldn't we be able to do that in our pajamas and at home, right? Like, one of the worst things about remote work is that like you miss that social connection. But Gather can bring that back, right? So I think we're trying to make the real world better, because if the pandemic ends and everybody's doing remote work through Gather, like that's just better, right? You can be wherever you want, you can move around, you can be a nomad, you can do any of these things. So yes, some things are just better in person, right? Some events maybe are better in person, some events maybe not, right? Some academic conferences right now are staying virtual forever because they get participants from all over the globe. Because before you had to fly to Egypt or whatever to attend this conference, but now you can just attend from your laptop, and there's no travel restrictions, right? You can attend from anywhere, and I think that's really powerful. So to me, we want to provide the option for people to have those kinds of interactions they used to have, just from wherever they want to be.
Just a quick follow-up on that. There's an interesting dynamic on Gather, I think, where you have something to do with like proximity, right? Like when you get closer to somebody, their voice becomes louder on Gather, and their video also becomes like clearer.
Yeah.
So is when you were thinking of designing this, were you thinking of like mimicking this sort of like real life interaction as much as possible, and like maybe what are you picking out of real life and what are you replacing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that's entirely on scope right now. We need to figure out what parts of real life are the ones that we want to bring into the metaverse, right? I think that this is still 100% under discovery. We don't really know. I think one thing that's really important is a sense of space. That is something we definitely want, right? Like, you should still be able to walk away from people. You still want that sense of spatialness, right? I think that's really, really important for us. Something that I think shouldn't be in the metaverse is like a limit on the things that, like, for example, like on like how big your space can be. For instance, why is it that when you move offices, you have to like, you build a new building, right? In the metaverse, you should be able to just expand your walls. That should just be good enough, right? And it should be super easy. So a lot of this is going to become more clear as we continue to explore this path that we have going down. Right now, all we know is that we want to try it. And take some interactions in a row, bring it to the metaverse, and see what it feels like. If we don't like it, then we'll just, not have it in the metaverse, right? We have that option now.
Did Gather ever consider joining an incubator? And I don't know, was there any thought that went into that decision?
Yeah, good question. So before Gather was founded, two of the co-founders were actually working on something called Siempre, and this was a Y Combinator company, right? And we really are thankful for that, 1 year that they were able to innovate and I was able to go to school, And after we come out of that, I think they have learned a lot about what it means to run a company and tried a lot of things and developed a lot of thoughts. And I had graduated, so like the stars kind of aligned and we were able to start Gather. So in a way, we did go through an incubator. By the time we started Gather, there wasn't really a need for an incubator anymore. Partially because I think we very quickly landed like a conference that gave us money, right? So we're like, oh, great, So we were very privileged and super lucky in that we never really had too many issues with money. So we just never did.
I guess on that note, has Gather kicked in VC money, and if so, what was the thought that went into that decision?
We have. Yeah, we've taken some VC money, and I think the thought here is, you know, I think building the metaverse will require a big coordinated effort. And like I said earlier, an empty metaverse is no metaverse at all, right? So we need to first build those concrete use cases, and building those concrete use cases takes work. You know, it takes some software engineers to go build on top of Gather. It takes salespeople to go start those businesses that we want to start, right? So that requires a big team, and big teams need money. That's why we raise money.
I think we have some more online.
Yeah, we
Sure.
have some more online questions. So, Anonymous, again,
Love it.
asked, you mentioned working with your friends and recruiting your friends. Have you ever had difficulties with that? For example, conflicts in different points of view?
I think we've been lucky. I think the most big reason why a lot of startups fail is conflict between co-founders. My co-founders and I have always worked together really well. I don't know if there's some kind of secret. I don't really think there is. I think we just got lucky, that we all just vibe together very well. All of us are very direct with our thoughts, and I think we have conflicts of opinion all the time, right? But what's important is that we're able to resolve them, work through them, figure out what's right and what's wrong, and kind of come together to come to a path. So far I haven't had too many issues with working with my friends. Now, that being said, from anecdotal experience, I know that, founding a startup with friends is hard. You should expect to have disagreements. And I think if you go into this experience anticipating that there will be disagreements, and that's okay, right? I don't think anybody ever really has full context, so it's unrealistic to expect that everyone will always align. But going with that expectation will really help and temper what you feel when those disagreements come up.
So, fielding in another question from online, have you had any, sorry, I should have said it's from Anonymous. Have you had any discussions with the company about incorporating Gather in VR in the future?
Yes, we discussed this extensively. I think right now this is undecided. Our CEO is a big fan of VR, right? And I get a little bit dizzy when I run on VR, full disclosure, right? I think this is unclear. I think VR has a very bright future, but I don't think we have near or medium-term plans for that. And that's because, like I said earlier, empty metaverse, no metaverse at all, right? And VR is just not accessible enough for us to be able to use it yet. One of the great things about Gather is you can just go on a web browser, go to Gather.town, and you can go into a space. No downloads, nothing, right? And that's one of the greatest things about it, is that it's so accessible. And we want to keep that. So no plans for now, but maybe someday in the future.
Okay, fielding in another question from online. Alex M. Chen asks, how often...
Another Alex Chen?
Yeah, he's going to ask how often do you meet other people named Alex Chen.
Oh, this is a great question. I love this question. I'm looking at this. When I was a freshman at MIT, I got mixed up for an interview with Alex Y. Chen. So I show up at the interview place, and I see this other Asian dude there, and I talk to him, are you my interviewer? And he's like, no, I'm coming here for an interview. We both go to the same recruiter, and they're like, yeah, Alex? And we're like, yeah. I think the interview was actually for him, because I was a freshman. But it was awkward, so she interviewed both of us. It was very uncomfortable, but not recommend. Anyway, after that experience, I got his number, and we helped a little Alex Chen meetup in Cambridge. 4 Alex Chens came together to do a little meetup. It was great. It was super fun. And I'm still in touch with those Alex Chens today. So I don't think I answered your question, but I don't know if there are any new Alex Chens. You guys let me know. Whether the Alex Chen dynasty at MIT has been preserved. But I haven't heard of anybody at MIT that's named Alex Chen now. So but yeah, 3 others that I've heard. And I guess now 4. Alex and Chen.
Oh yeah.
Welcome to the club.
So another question from online. William Antonio asks, what language was used to build Gather.town? How important is it to choose the right tech stack at the beginning of a project?
Oh, this is a great question. I think my CTO and I would have somewhat different answers to this, because he's he likes building things in the right way, and I like building things really fast and just getting a product out there, right? Different views on both a very similar issue. I think to answer your first question, Gather was built in React, JavaScript, not TypeScript, JavaScript, Node.js, and Firebase. Now, JavaScript is a fun language. If I was to restart, I'd probably build in PyScript, right? So take that as a recommendation. I think in the beginning, it doesn't really matter. Building products, you know, I think technically, especially products that are more, like less technology dependent, right? So if you're trying to start like a machine learning startup and your startup is surrounded with your technology, right? Like it like builds things very quickly, for instance, right? You probably care more. For Gather, the innovation isn't necessarily in the technology itself. Anyone can clone Gather. In fact, our original source code is online. It's open source. You guys can go build your own versions of Gather, right? If you want. So the innovation here is actually in the way we build it. And when you're building a startup where the details matter, like how you're building a product is what really matters. We're called what's called a product-driven company, right? Then the technology that's backing it, you can switch that out at any time. We could go back and we could rewrite Gather, right? Take us a little bit, but it wouldn't take us like a year and a half. So do whatever you're comfortable with, right? Take some technical debt in the beginning, it's okay. As long as eventually you are able to innovate around it, then it's all good.
This is a very solid answer. So another anonymous asks, you talked about how the organization of Gather scaled as you hired more people, but how did like the feature iteration process change?
Oh, this is a really good question. Well, the short answer is we're still figuring it out. Every company is different, you know, and different people will want different systems for how they should organize their companies. So there's no one real right answer here. We've gone through many different iterations of trying stuff, right? One thing that we tried very recently is we did a organizational refactor that we're giving platforms. And we'll split the team, the engineering team, and product and design teams into like, you know, some platform squads and some, you know, app squads. And the app squads are working on those concrete use cases I told you guys about, right? So remote work or events. And the platform team works on improving the platform as a whole. You know, making video better, you know, upping the game server size, things like that, right? And this has allowed us to move a lot faster because each individual squad can make decisions for themselves and execute independently. Before that, we were very much more monolithic. There was, you know, one engineering team. We'd do planning every 2 weeks, right? We'd figure out what we want to build. And that was a lot slower, a lot more methodical, but everybody had context with each other, so they everybody knew what everybody else was doing. It really depends on you. You know, I think when it comes to startups, the most important thing is that you're willing to innovate. So you need to go and try these things and see what works best for you, because if you don't try it, you're never going to know. Like, advisors will just tell you all kinds of stuff, and most of it won't work for you, full disclosure, right? Because again, they've scaled on average like one startup, right? So how could they know? So go try stuff, and if it doesn't work, that's okay, try again. Cool. Yeah.
Has Gather ever hired a consultant, or has it just been decisions between you and your co-founders?
We've hired some consulting for things that are, you know, we for instance, we've worked with like a design agency to help us with certain tasks. We've hired like consultants for like tests, things like this, right? In terms of organizational structure, it's all been internal. I think the founders are lucky in that we love to just sit around and talk all the time about stuff. So this platform idea came out of a retreat we did in New York. We just sat in an apartment, and the four of us pulled an all-nighter talking about how we're going to rethink the organization we better. And by 7 a.m. the next morning, this is what we came up with, right? And the next week, we put it into motion, right? But I think the most important thing is, you know, consultants don't know your company nearly as well as you do. I don't think consultants would have been able to come with this like radical idea of like splitting the team and making each one like a small startup, right? It's a very weird thing. In fact, we've gone so far as splitting the code. So the remote work team has like different code files. Then like we share some code and then we split some of the code as well. It's very weird, right? And I don't think any advisor or consultant would tell you that. So at the end of the day, I would rely mostly on your co-founders for organizational decisions. Like you guys know your company the best.
So we have one more question from Anonymous.
Sure.
A lot of students at Hack MIT are interested in founding their own startup. What's some advice you give to undergrads to learn more about startups or how to start one?
Amazing. Yeah. I love the fact that people at Hack are so entrepreneurial and trying to move forward and start these things. That innovation is wonderful, right? Yeah, starting your own startup. I think the most important thing is pick your co-founders right. I got very lucky. My co-founders are wonderful, and we were always able to work together really well. Most startups fail because co-founders aren't able to work together for one reason or another, and it's never any one person's fault, right? Maybe some kind of disagreement happens or something like that. Picking your co-founders right is the most important thing. Second thing is make sure you're working on a problem that you're interested in, right? That you think is really cool. That when you wake up and you go work on that code, you're excited. You do something and you're like, wow, that was so cool. Because if you're not doing that, like other founders are pulling over 100-hour weeks because they just love their, whatever they're working on so much. Right? That drive is super important when you're a founder because you're going to go through all kinds of hard times. You're going to pull so many all-nighters, right? It's going to be really hard. And you're going to need something to pull you through all that. And then the most important thing is being excited about your product. Right? So, pick a good idea. Pick one that, it doesn't have to be a good idea, right? Pick an idea you're passionate about, right? And it'll be good. And then pick your co-founders right. And, have a little bit of luck in there, and everything will be okay.
I think we're coming up on the hour. It's a little bit
You
long.
have 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Okay, are we on MIT time?
We can go, then we can have 9 minutes.
Okay.
Right, so you're always talking about product and what it means to you to have a lovely product or product that's custom to the user specifically. And you're talking about you are willing to do whatever it takes, to what the company needs you to do. But do you think at some point you'll ever sell out to become like an exec and leave your love for like engineering the product? Like other CEOs like Elon Musk, he loves being an engineer such that he doesn't care. He lets the business people handle the business side of things, but he just loves being the version of the product. Do you think you're gonna at some point move to that suit and tie?
Exactly. Yeah. Good question. So my evolution as a working at Gather, at first I was very execution heavy, right? And then, like we just mentioned, I turned into more of an exec. Trying to run my teams, figure out the organization. Doing a lot of one-on-ones. There was at one point where I had I think 14 reports, right? It's a startup, right? Like things like this are going to happen. We had no layers, right? So I just had 14 reports, right? About 2 days was just full one-on-ones, right? And I think it varies person to person. Some people go into being an exec and they love it, right? They love that kind of, because you have a lot of influence and you're doing a lot of impact in your company by being an exec. For me, I didn't find it nearly as interesting. And for a while, I just couldn't accept that. Because the path that you're taught when you're starting a startup is you become a co-founder, right? And you build the MVP, and you peace out and you're an exec, right? And you drink champagne and go to one-on-ones for the rest of your life, right? And I was just I can't do that. So, to answer your question, I eventually became more exec-y, and now I'm trying to be less exec-y, right? To try to come back to more of the engineering, which I think is what I'm really passionate about. So it varies person to person. I think if your startup really supports you and you have the means to do it, you should try to do whatever you are most passionate about, because that is the way you can influence your company best, right? I don't think that I'm a particularly great exec. I think we can hire much better execs than me, but I love driving the remote working, right? Working with that team and really getting into the dirt with it. And that's where I think I'm making the most impact in the company, and I think that's okay. So it still comes back to making the most impact in your company. It just depends on where you think you fit into that. Doesn't have to be an exec.
Okay, so another question online is, how does your work-life balance compare to being a student at MIT versus working on an early stage startup?
Good question. All right, depends on how many classes you take. I don't know. I don't know. When I was an MN student, dude, I don't even know what I was doing. What was I doing half the time? I don't know. Going to lab, I don't know. So it really depends on the MIT student, really depends on the startup, right? Startups are a lot of work. So don't like start a startup at the same time you have a kid, or like adopt a dog or something like that, you know? I pulled a lot of all-nighters. There was one time where 2 days before our first big academic conference, we realized our game servers didn't scale past 50 people in one space. And these people had bought a space for 300 people, right? Like 200 something, and like it's not gonna work, right? The co-founders and I, me and our CTO, we pulled multiple, like very, very late nights, rewriting the entire thing, right? So that it worked. And I shipped it, tested it for a few days, and boom, right? It was in the product. And I think you have to be willing to do that. So would I say that I think the workload is similar to a very busy MIT, let's put it that way, right? But it's also different because the work is slightly different. I think with MIT, you're like constantly context switching and stuff like that, right? With a startup, you're working on one problem, and you better be willing to work on it, like a lot per day, depending on the time.
Cool. All right. That seems like a natural stopping point.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for your time. This was
Yeah.
really fun.
Thank you all so much. I really enjoyed that. And thanks for having me. Super, super awesome.
Thank you. So we are stopping.